of the fellowship schemes. I think a lot of the slides do kind of talk about the NIHR fellowship schemes, but I've got a few examples of other areas where you can apply as well. So the NIHR have two main fellowship kind of programs. You've got the pre-doctoral fellowships, and they're more of an academic route, and then there's also a more of a clinical route, which I'll tell you about that after. So in the academic side, there's a pre-doctoral fellowship, the Development and Skills Enhancement Award, which is kind of a training award, the doctoral fellowship and the advanced fellowship, and the dates that they come out are on the slide. Now, it has changed a little bit. So in 2018, the Academy was launched. And so now these fellowships here do also, the doctoral and the advanced fellowship do allow an aspect of clinical work as part of the fellowship, whereas previously they didn't. They also have linked with a number of charities and also this year with Pfizer to allow a partnership fellowship. So these fellowships allow you to link not only with the NIHR and have access to the training and the advice and support from the NIHR Academy, but they also help you to build and maintain a relationship with the actual partner organisation. So these are relatively new. I think this year there is only, in this round that's just been announced, it is Moorfields, iCharity and Pfizer. Each round tends to be a little bit different. I think, unfortunately, in the past, there's been around 4 different charities at each round. I think, unfortunately, due to the current circumstances, charitable funding's kind of reduced significantly. The other pathway is the clinical academic side. Now, on their website, they'll show you a list of job professions that are eligible to apply for these schemes, but they have internships, bridging schemes, a pre-doctoral academic fellowship, the clinical doctoral academic research fellowship, the clinical lectureship and the senior clinical lectureship. These are launched once a year, which is different to the doctoral fellowship, the academic routes. So like I said, the Academy was launched in 2018 and they changed the way the fellowships were offered. So they're very much changed to the changing needs of actual researchers. So previously the postdoctoral fellow awards were very much, there were lots of different sort of areas and they've brought them all together to allow a bit more flexibility. They've included the clinical time, which they hadn't done previously. But there's also a much more of an emphasis now on career development alongside the funding. So they really look at the training that you're planning on doing. So if you look at the clinical academic side, the expectation is that you do both academic and some clinical training as part of the actual fellowship. And they look at this in quite a lot of detail to ensure that you're doing the things that not only will help you complete the project that you're planning on doing, but also to actually further develop you as a researcher. So recently, I think with most of the NIHR applications, it's always been a 2-stage application. And this now for all of the Academy fellowships have been changed to a single stage. So now this means that you need to actually include all of your PPI and the detailed budget section, which previously you didn't need to do until just before the interviews. Everything else is the same. They've allowed a little bit of an increase in word count, although not significant. But yeah, so now it's just a single stage as opposed to double 2-stage. So there are other fellowship schemes. So the Research Councils, MRC, Wellcome Trust, they all have fellowship schemes at different levels, from early career all the way through to senior researchers. The charities do, so the Stroke Association, British Heart Foundation, CRUK. At the moment, the charity, as I said before, there's been quite a few that have pulled funding, unfortunately. So these might be on hold for a little bit longer. So recently, we have supported a number of different fellowships. So this is just an example to show that we've supported people applying for all areas, all levels, from the clinical doctoral, the advanced, the development and skills enhancement, doctoral, advanced. And the Stroke Association Postdoctoral Research Fellowship. It is a very whistle-stop tour, but that's all.
Thanks, Natasha.
That one.
And now we're going to hand over to Louise, and Louise is going to give us an overview of EME and I4I.
Okay, and I shall just try and find my slide. I think that's the one. Yes, hello, thank you everybody, nice to see you again. Yes, so I'll give you a very quick overview of, I think I4I first actually, and then EME. So I thought it's useful just to show you this, it's a bit of a complicated, what would you call it, chart, graph, figure. I feel like the Boris Johnson doing all those awful graphs on the TV on Saturday now. But it's just to try and show you where I4I and EME sit, so I can point them out here. So in terms of the translational journey of a research project from very basic research, which NIHR don't get involved with, towards implementation. So I4I kind of straddles right through translational to the point of implementation. Oh, no, I can't get the slide to move. Oh, there we go. I was just circling it for you so you can see it. Okay, so this is just a quote from their website. So they support the preclinical and clinical development of medical devices in an existing or emergent patient need. And the real difference for I4I compared to many of the, oops, I'm changing slides unintentionally now. The main difference between I4I and the other NIHR funding streams is that it's much more of a kind of commercial endeavour, so more of a business mindset. So they're looking about turning some sort of medical technology into a sort of sound business proposal. So the sort of evidence they want to see is a little bit different. So they want to see that you've looked at the market, that there is a commercial market for it, that you can see how it would fit into the NHS, where it will go in existing care pathways. They'd look for some kind of health economics to suggest that there was a value to the NHS. Regulatory kind of things are an important aspect, and often in I4I applications there'll be a whole work package around regulatory issues and getting to the point of a CE marking, for example, on a device. Intellectual property is very important. Obviously you need to safeguard the knowledge that you generate, and then the commercialization is a really the other big part of this, which you wouldn't normally have. So I mean, in terms of what Bronnie was talking about earlier, the impact, it's that kind of thing, how are you getting it out there, but in this case it's how are you persuading people to buy it, so both the NHS and more widely. So the key considerations, I think, for I4I are to be wary that you're not finding a problem for a solution, so that you've not already developed a nice device and then you're looking for something you could use it for. You need to be coming from the point of identifying a problem and then looking for a solution. You need to have really good evidence that there is a market for it. So you've got to be able to, you can't just go, with your kind of, I'm telling you that it's there. You need some sort of evidence to demonstrate that. Typically, I mean, as with all these applications, but perhaps a bit more so for I4I, you need a really broad team. So you need the healthcare, the tech people, the people that can do the regulatory stuff, and then the commercial partner and business people as well. There's a requirement that you have proof of concept, so you have to have some limited, at least, information from a small number of tests to suggest that your product is going to work, it's going to do what it says it can do. And one way of generating that type of proof of concept data is to go for an MRC Confidence in Concept Award, which are funds provided by MRC specifically for this purpose, and they're distributed to institutions. So for example, if you could apply, if you're at Newcastle University, you could apply through Newcastle University for their funding. And the product must be innovative or to be using an existing technology for a new problem, so transferring it to a new market. There are 3 different types of I4I awards. So there's the Connect Award. For all of them you need proof of concept, but I think this is trying to demonstrate that the different levels of award move up in terms of implementation, or along in terms of implementation. So the Connect Awards are the sort of furthest from implementation, and they're aimed at SMEs. So the SME is the applicant for those awards. There's just one round of that a year, I think, and they're typically fairly small. So they take about 6 to 12 months and funding up to about 150,000. And then the Challenge Awards and the PDAs are more similar. They can be led by either an SME, an education institution, or an NHS trust. They're usually up to 36 months, and they don't have an upper funding limit. You just have to justify the funding that you require. For PDAs, they're really looking at this development of a commercializing product. For the challenge awards, it can be evaluation of technology that are already market ready, so they're a little bit closer to being implemented. These are the timelines, just to give you an idea of how long it takes to get your funding through. So there's an existing call at the moment. It's just opened in October with a deadline of the 9th of December. So the outcomes from the stage 1 submission for that will be February, and then you'll be invited to, if you're successful at stage 1, to resubmit at stage 2, and they will go in April, and then you'll get the final outcome in July. So it's kind of about 9 months typically from initial submission to finding out whether or not you're successful. This is an example of a study that was funded by I4I, which Newcastle University was a partner in. They didn't lead on it. I think this was actually a challenge award, if I remember rightly, but you'll get the slides, so if you're interested in looking up these examples afterwards, you can always do that. And a little bit about the DPFS. So this is the MRC's project, which funds sort of translation from real bench sort of science, so at that really early stage of translation. These are always academically led. And then they need to be focused on, as you can see on the slide, improving prevention, diagnosis and so on of significant health needs. So they can be at any point on the translational pathway, but typically they wouldn't get as far as phase 2 testing in a single application. So they like them to be kind of sequential. So you might go for one piece of work to get to a certain point and then go back for more funding to develop that. Or it might be that you do a DPFS and then transfer over onto I4I or EMI indeed. So these are a quicker application. It's usually 6 months from application to decision. There are 3 deadlines a year for these, no limit on the funding you can request, and they do really like you to have an industry partner. It's not an absolute requirement, but they do like that. And then there's the criteria on which they're judged, which I think are things you would expect. So is the need significantly demonstrating that whatever you're developing is going to be addressing a significant need? Can you provide good evidence that your solution will address the need that you've identified? Is your team right to do it? And will the work be good value for money? And have you thought through the IP and how you're going to commercialise your product? So it's similar kind of criteria really to the I4I. And again, an example there that was led by Newcastle, if you were interested in looking. But in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over onto EMI. So just showing you where EMI sits again in that funding landscape. So it's kind of falls within the I4I area, but it's further away from the implementation. So again, this is what they say on their website, that they are about funding ambitious studies, evaluating interventions with potential to make a step change. So they're not interested in sort of small incremental improvements. They're looking for kind of big wow type projects. We think of it all as an NIHR funding stream, but they do receive some funding from MRC as well. So it's translational research to evaluate either a new intervention or a repurposing of an existing intervention or a drug that's been used in a different condition or in a different setting. And they focus on novel methodologies, so they're always looking for, can you use a novel design that will make your study more efficient? They're interested in stratification, so can you demonstrate different effects in different groups, or that your treatment is particularly effective in a specific group? Using information captured through digital technology, so can you use digital technology to make things more efficient? That they are very keen that you collaborate with other funders, so if you can get funding from somewhere else, either from a charity or industry. And they're interested in, so they say, interested in broadening the range of interventions being evaluated, and including into sort of public health type initiatives, which is quite interesting in the context of NIHR's general move towards working in public health and social care. So EMI, the M in EMI, so this is about mechanistic testing. So, and they do state that where appropriate, they encourage hypothesis testing mechanistic studies within the main study. So to try and explore the mechanism of action, so why the intervention works. And that they say that's not a requirement, but my sort of just anecdotal evidence is that they do look for the mechanistic part of a study when they receive an application. So I think that's worth bearing in mind if you were thinking of an EMI study. They will also fund standalone sort of mechanistic studies using data from an NIHR funded study to try and explore the mechanism within that. And they specifically say they'll include qualitative work and mechanistic work around in using qualitative studies. And in addition to the usual two-stage application, which we've sort of talked about is the usual for the NIHR fundings, they also have this fast track. So if there's a sort of narrow time window where you would need to do something in order for it to be useful. So, you know, the COVID is the obvious example at the moment, but if you had something that you thought, oh, you know, I can really evaluate this quickly in the current climate, you can go for this 3 month, well, shortened by 3 months, it gets it down to more like 6 months. So you're going for a one stage. So instead of putting in your stage 1, you would go for a full stage application. And I've not seen very many examples of this being used or being successful, to be honest. And they do ask that well, they wouldn't accept it unless you have prior agreement from the EMI programme team. So the current opportunities, there's a call that's open at the moment, just about to close on the 1st of December. I've put my little hazard light there, so that, you know, that's very close now. So I wouldn't really suggest trying to go for that deadline if you're not already well on your way to developing an application. They also have, again, with a deadline of 1st of December, they have a special sort of call around cystic fibrosis. So they will do that, as all the funders do. You can go in with your own idea, researcher-led, or they have topics of interest that they will ask the specific projects to be submitted to those. And again, warning that that's coming up very soon. And then there's an example again for a funded EMI study. I've chosen this one, it's quite an old one now, but I like it because it does use sort of qualitative methods to look at behaviour change, or mixed methods, so qualitative and quantitative, which I just think is nice because we think of EMI as being very, you know, medical and quantitative, I think. So it's nice to see that they do sometimes fund things with qualitative methods as well. And I've got to the end of mine, you'll be pleased to know, sorry, that was a bit of a rush through, wasn't it?
Thanks, Louise. A lot to cover because you had two schemes to cover there. Can we go straight to Nikki, who I think is going to cover HS and DR. You're just muted there, Nikki.
So it wouldn't let me unmute while I was screen sharing. No, that's not doing it. Right, is that okay? Can everyone see that and hear me now?
Yeah.
Yep, great, good. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick overview of health services and delivery research funding stream. So the HS&DR, which it's shortened to, it supports ambitious evaluative research to improve health and social care services and their delivery. So they fund research that will produce evidence to impact on the quality, accessibility, organisation of services and the workforce that's specific to the NHS or social care, and it includes improving delivery of services. They support many types of research, including primary research, which has a two-stage application process, and evidence synthesis research, which has a one-stage application process. They have the usual researcher-led work streams, which usually deadlines are around September, January and April, and they also provide commissioned calls as well. So what HS and DR are looking for are mainly proposals that address areas of major strategic importance to the NHS and social care. So and they're looking for applications with costs that are in line with the significance of the problem that's being addressed. So they want to see a clearly identified need and rationale that fills a clear evidence gap. And they're looking for research that's likely to lead to significant change in practice on a large scale. So looking at influencing a large number of patients across the UK, and looking for proposals that are scalable and transferable, so that the research findings have the potential to be applied to other conditions or other situations, and are likely to include large, like multi-site, so more than one site, to make sure that their findings are going to be transferable. They're especially interested in evaluation of interventions that already have some signal of efficacy, and they don't really fund routine service development work. As with many of the other funding streams, they're looking for a really strong team, and they're also looking for partnership working between experienced academic teams and those that are involved in the delivery and commissioning of health and social care services. So the funding that they have available, there's no funding limit as such, but the range and scope of the funding does actually reflect the ambitious nature of the research that they're looking for funding to fund. So on average, they tend to fund projects around the £800,000 mark about over 3 years, but that's just an average, and it really ranges from £250,000 for an evidence synthesis, for example, up to the most that they've funded is a 2.5 million trial that was over 4 years. So it is have to be make sure that the funding is it has to be appropriate to the scale and significance of the problem being addressed. It's probably worth noting as well that they don't cover non-NHS intervention costs. So just to give an idea of some of the breadth of the types of different research that they cover, there's 3 examples here of research that's been funded by HSNDR. So the first one was looking at developing and evaluating an intervention on communication skills training. The second is a health economics modelling study, and the third is a meta-ethnography of professionals' experiences of treating adults with chronic non-malignant pain, looking at improving experience and quality of health care. As I mentioned before, there are the researcher-led program. The next application deadline for that is in February 2021. They also have some commissioned calls at the moment. So there's one on cystic fibrosis with a deadline of February as well. They have an evaluation of an alcohol, smoking and substance involvement screening tool, which the deadline is in December. So as Louise mentioned, again, unless you have something already prepared for that, that's is going to be too short notice. It's just to give an example of the range of calls they sometimes have. And another call they have at the moment is self-neglect in the community, which is quite a broad ranging call, and that deadline is in January. They've also just yesterday released a highlight notice for the health and social care workforce. So that's online at the moment. And again, that's quite broad ranging, and it covers mainly proposals looking at the right skills and experiences for improving quality of care, recruitment and retention of staff, staff mental health and well-being, and leadership. So that deadline is February 21 as well. And that's it for me from HSNDR. Thanks.
Thanks, Nikki. So moving on to Bronya next, and Bronya's going to cover the Public Health Research and Policy Research Programme.
Yeah. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Excellent. I'll just put it on slideshow. Yeah. So I'm going to be talking today about, first of all, the Public Health Research Programme within the NIHR funding. And I'm going to give you a brief overview of this. And basically, the Public Health Research Scheme primary aim is to evaluate practical non-NHS interventions. So if you are looking to assess an intervention, to evaluate an intervention which is not based in the NHS, might be based in schools or in public health, for example, this could be the funding stream for you. And it's not only concerned with improving public health, but it's also concerned with reducing health inequalities. The scheme will fund primary research, so mainly it will fund an evaluation of an intervention to work out if it is effective or not, but in some cases it will fund preparatory research. So for example, often this is if an intervention has been developed in a different country. So for example, if an intervention was developed for US schools and we wanted to try it out in UK schools, there are differences between the school systems in the UK and the US, and therefore we might need to do some preparatory research to see if this could be done in the UK before we went into a full evaluation in the UK. So Public Health Research Programme may fund that preparatory research, but they take it on a case-by-case basis. Mainly they will fund full evaluations of interventions. They will also in some cases fund secondary research, so evidence synthesis. And they fund through both researcher-led and commission calls. Researcher-led calls are whereas you, the researcher, come up with a research question and you pitch that to the funding panel and they say whether they think it should be addressed. But commission calls are when the commissioners, the panel, come up with the question and they ask for people to sort of almost tender to address the question. And typically there are 3 researcher-led calls per year for PHR and around 3 commission calls, but there are sometimes more. Public health research wants to see applications that are multidisciplinary and broad in scope. They want your sort of project to inform the delivery of non-NHS interventions. They want the intervention the application to consider the benefits, the costs, the acceptability and the wider impacts of those interventions. And the primary outcome measure should always be health related unless it's otherwise specified. So for example, if it's a commission call and they say they would like something else to be the primary outcome measure, but typically the primary outcome measure should always be health related. On the Public Health Research website, you will find 10 key areas that they say they want you to really clearly describe in your research plan. And this is really helpful when you're putting together your application. So these areas are your research question, your population, your intervention, a comparator if that's appropriate, if you have a comparison group, what your primary outcome is and any secondary outcomes, your aims and objectives of the study, the team. This is really important. It's not just about the project, it's about whether you as a team can deliver on this project, whether your study design is well explained, whether you've justified your sample size. And again, health inequalities is important. It's not just about can we improve public health, but will this intervention widen health inequalities? Will it reduce health inequalities? They're really interested in that as an outcome, so it's important that you include that. They also publish their general assessment criteria on the website, so it's important to have a look at that. The things that they're really interested in are the need for the evidence, so you need to convince the panel about why they should fund this research. You also need to convince them that this is good value for money if they fund you. And they also need to be convinced by the scientific rigour. They want to know that this is a robust study that will give really robust evidence. One thing that's come out recently in the last few years is almost like a public health matchmaking service. So it's called Finder and it connects public health practice and research. So we can have researchers who are looking to do some research in a certain topic area, and there might be public health practitioners who have an intervention that they want to be evaluated, and this service puts the two together. So that's something to look into if you don't have a sort of public health provider and practitioner. And one thing I should say is that public health research typically don't fund the intervention costs, they will only fund the evaluation costs. So it will be important to have a public health practitioner on board for your application. I will do questions at the end. I'll stop sharing that now and move on to my other presentation because I didn't put them together. So can you see this one? Yeah. This is the policy research programme. This is also within the NIHR, and the policy research programme typically puts out commission calls. They set what the research question is, and they are looking for research that will provide robust evidence to inform policy development and implementation. And they want research that will deliver the evidence in timely and accessible ways. So they might need you to commit to a certain timescale to deliver the research in, and they also want outputs that are really accessible. So think again about the research impact presentation from earlier. They also want research that will assess the potential impact of the intervention and also the cost effectiveness of that intervention. And they want research that will evaluate policies, but this could include a pilot before the policy has been fully rolled out. So it may just be for a smaller piece of research of the pilot before a full implementation of the policy. And they also don't just want evidence on the short-term effects, but also on the longer-term effects. If you're submitting an application to the policy research programme, what they are looking for is research that can be flexible, that it can have regular input from policy stakeholders so that you are delivering exactly the kind of research evidence that they want to see and delivering in outputs that are accessible to them. They want you to provide new knowledge that will improve or evaluate services or policies, and they want the research to be generalisable. They want to know that you have covered all sorts of target populations, for example. The policy research programme will support a wide range of different research studies, including clinical trials, longitudinal studies and systematic reviews. It's just important that you pitch the right kind of study to answer the question that they need to be addressed. I recently attended an observation of a policy research programme funding panel, and I came sort of to the conclusion that there were some top tips from the funding panel for your application. And these were that they wanted the outputs to be relevant to a policy audience, but that didn't mean that the dissemination activities needed to be quite stale and quite dry. They were happy to see novel creative dissemination ideas. They were happy to see animations, as I've said, infographics, things like that. They don't just want to see a written report. So it's important that the outputs are relevant to them, but also creative. They wanted to see the right team with the right expertise, also costed in at the right amount. And they wanted to see that you had thought about the risks that were involved. So for example, if you needed to link data, could you do that? And were there any risks involved in that? And did you have any mitigation strategies in case things went wrong? They also wanted to see public and patient involvement included. They wanted this to be meaningful and costed and supported appropriately. So they not only want to see resources for people's time, but they also want to see training and any support for them that might be necessary. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. Please pop your questions in the chat and I'll answer them shortly.
Thanks, Bronya. And because we're working Louise really hard today, we're going back to Louise, who's going to cover programme grants and health technology, I think, in the last few minutes that we've got.
Yes, I shall be quick because I'm conscious that I'm standing between you and coffee. I just thought worth saying, though, having said I'll be quick, the sort of 10 areas that Bronya highlighted that PHR specifically say you should be covering your application. I think they're equally applicable to all these funding streams. They'd expect to see that. I mean, PHR is a particular interest in inequalities, but I think across it's useful to bear those in mind. And again, and the criteria upon which your application is judged is similar across the funders as well, which hopefully you've already gleaned from the previous 2 days of this course. So to say a little bit about programme grants for applied research, or PGFAR. The kind of at the other end of the scale from your RFPB applications, these are large interrelated projects, so where you've got more than one project and there's some kind of synergy or theme around them, and there are kind of economies to be gained, I guess, by running them together as one project. There's no funding limit, but it's unusual for them to go over 2.5 million. That would be seen as unusual, though there are examples of that actually. And there are typically 3 deadlines a year: April, July and November, and as usual it's this 2-stage application. The next competition will launch in February with a deadline in April. Oh, the first slide will never move. Here we go. So an example on the slide there, which you can go and look at in your own time if you're interested, but I've tried to find local examples. I think they were all from Newcastle actually, but so this is one led by Alan Culver, which published last year, which was funded as a PGFAR. If you're a team that's thinking about applying for a PGFAR, you can apply for a programme development grant first, and that's the kind of to enable you to build up your team and do some sort of exploratory work to develop that application. And the funding now, it used to be up to 100,000 and they've increased it to 150, and it can be over 12 to 24 months. And if once you've completed the programme development grant, there's no guarantee at all that you will then get your PGFAR, but it puts you in a stronger position. It's enabled you to get your team working, demonstrate you can do it and so on. And you can then go straight to stage 2 in the PGFAR competition. You don't have to go in at stage 1, although you can choose to go to stage 1. And sometimes that's useful to get the feedback from the stage 1 panel as well. So that will be your choice. So moving on to HTA, so health technology assessment. And again, this is right at the opposite end from sort of EMI in the DPFS that we talked about earlier. So this is about much more real world evaluation and establishing cost effectiveness of interventions. And to think about whether or not you should be going for an HTA rather than an EMI, for example, you can think about, is there a reasonable chance of the intervention being effective? So is there already good evidence and you just need to demonstrate it in a definitive trial? Is the intervention already in use, or has it been used in NHS settings already, or with NHS or social care type patients already? Is there a reasonable chance that it will be delivered across the NHS or social care if you demonstrate its success? And again, there's often cases where something's already been used, but it hasn't actually been trialled. So it's used in the NHS already without any real evidence to support it. And that will be a case to go to HTA. And like the other funders, they will have commission calls where they'll ask for very specific, and they have lots of these HTA, several a year, where they ask for very specific questions, and they're quite prescriptive about what they want you to include in your study in that case. But you can also go into the researcher-led call where you take your own ideas. Here's another example of an HTA led this time by Helen Rogers, a stroke consultant here in Newcastle, which was published recently. I thought I can't resist just saying a few words about this, because you think it's all that money and all this time, and then they have a little sentence going, well, the rehabilitation service did not improve stroke survivors' performance, and that it boils down to that in the end after this huge piece of work. But that's the nature of the beast, I suppose, and the work has to be done to demonstrate or not the effectiveness of the intervention. I was just going to say a few words about the MRC, and I really am on borrowed time now, just to say they have different funding streams to NIHR that may be more appropriate to your work, depending on what it is you're thinking about doing. And they fund in these areas that are on the slide here, and probably the best thing is to either come to us if you're thinking of going to the MRC because we'll support applications to them, or have a look on their website to get more information about their funding and what sort of things they're interested in. And I think you'll be pleased to know that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.